I'm just gonna, once I see the light. Welcome. Welcome to all our members, the new members. This is the fourth meeting of the Joint Commissions, as we call you, Economic Vitality, Human Services, and Planning Policy Commission, where we're all working on the housing strategy. And tonight, since there are some new members, your packet had a lot of background information to try to get you a little bit up to speed, but I'm going to run through a refresher course very quickly, although you feel free to ask questions and have comments on it, because the other members haven't seen it since January, so they may be a little rusty on these ideas as well. So we're going to do a little background. We're going to remind the group of the 3 problem statements that you all came up with. We're going to talk about the survey results that no one has seen yet. Pretty exciting, the housing survey that we just did. And then we're going to talk about some of the actions and strategies that Issaquah might try to help us with our housing, our future housing. And then we're going to talk about next steps. Okay. This is one of those great graphics that we throw in every time, just so you know that how clever we really are at scheduling. This is the whole housing strategy that we're working on. The first part of the work we did was looking at the inventory that we have now and what the future might look like if we don't do anything. If we just let the market continue how it's going, what would it look like? And we had that presentation in September to the council, and we found that we really didn't have the types of housing and the sizes and cost ranges of housing that we really needed if we kept going the way that we're going. So the second part is where you all come in, and we're working at trying to figure out what do we want in the future, what kinds of homes, what are the problems that we might face if we don't do some course corrections at this point. And so that's where we are right now. We're in the very end of the needs analysis. And then once we are finished with that, then we actually start talking about the policy pieces and start talking to even some of the developers on, Ron, there's lots of seats, Ron. On what kinds of, what the folks that build affordable housing and housing, what do we need to have a better discussion with them on how can we help them provide the kind of housing in our community that we would like. And then the last part is actually wrapping up with the housing strategy that would go to council for their blessing. And we're sort of using the three groups as sort of part of our public outreach, because housing is trickier than a lot of the other pieces and parts that we work on, that you really kind of have to get into the guts of it. So we've been using the three groups, because you all come from different areas of expertise, and just to get you guys to help us, because you're sort of the mini community here. So we rely on you to help us move forward with this. The first thing you all did, the ones that were here, but the new ones, is you figured out a mission statement to help you with this huge task of creating a housing strategy. And this is what you came up with. And it seems to cover sort of the whole body of work that you're working towards. Because it is so big, we wanted to be sure we weren't going down rabbit holes as we were working through things. Once we were done with the mission statement, we started narrowing it down to what are the problems we're trying to solve for the future. And these were the reasons that you all came up with problem statements, to sort of help guide us as we put some packages of strategies together. And now, drum roll, this was the first problem statement. And it might not be a surprise to you all. Overall housing affordability in Issaquah has decreased for households at all levels. This isn't just our issue, it's the regional issue. And in your packet there were tons of charts and graphs and data, all that good stuff. But I thought for the public, we would just make it very general on the facts that we found to support this problem statement. The second one, the second problem statement you all came up with, is individuals and families cannot afford to choose to work and live in Issaquah. And again, there was a lot of data and charts in your packet that supports this problem statement, or supports that this is a finding. And this is one that we're working on as well for the future. The third one is the housing types are not meeting the diversity of demand, and the data supported that by showing that the sizes of homes that it seems that we're building are not really the sizes that seem to be what folks are looking for. And so that's another issue that we're working on. Another, I should have mentioned, in addition to working with you all, we've also had 7 different focus groups that we've met with, from large businesses in town, smaller businesses in town, school district, supportive services, senior services, the realtors. I'm probably missing some very important group. But they've been great helping us to, from their niche of the housing that they see that's needed, the groups that they're servicing, and the different issues that are presented by the smaller groups. So that information has been funneled in as well. The survey says, the survey was open for almost 4 weeks. 10 questions. Hopefully you all were able to perhaps answer the survey. I know the members that were already on it, I sent a few emails, hey, check out the housing survey. There were 171 responses, and I'm just going to go through real fast. I wish we would have had the results before the packet went out so you could kind of ponder it, but we'll get that to you as well. The first one was, when you're looking for a place to live, what are your top 5 factors? Being near daily services was a high one. I think cost is a high one, price, rent. Quality schools, which we're very lucky to have. So that was, I think the answers weren't too surprising. And if you want to stop me and ask follow-up questions, feel free. The second question, which of these statements reflect Issaquah today? So we were trying to figure out how do people feel about what they think is out there now. And these weren't too surprising. There's a lack of very small houses. People seem to agree with that. There seems to be demolition of existing housing. A lot of people were neutral on that they weren't really sure if we were getting rid of housing. We talked about seniors. Do folks think that seniors are able to live in their homes? Most people agreed with that, although still a lot were neutral. This is the same list. Are there opportunities for families? A lot of people agreed that there aren't as many housing opportunities for families, and especially younger families. I thought that was interesting. Lack of affordable housing scored very high, that folks agree with that. And then lack of housing with access to good transit. That seemed to be, most folks agreed with that. Lack of homes that accommodate extended families. A lot of neutral, kind of on either side, and overall housing stock, most folks agreed with that. Question 3, have you or anyone you know had trouble finding a place to live? Yes, the majority said yes, they knew somebody in the last 5 years. And what kept you from finding, or the someone you know, it was mostly cost. So that was telling as well. Then we were having people look into the future. What would be successful in their idea, in their mind, for the future of housing? And the first one, you know, is a good mom and apple pie one, that all stages of life, that you should be able to live here all your life, whether you're, you know, right out of school, college, first-time family, empty nester, the whole gamut. Most people agreed that that would be a really good thing. Aging in place scored really well, that people would like that in the future. Local employees, they were trying to get the live-work balance so more people can work and live here. Cuts down on the traffic as well. Would they like that to happen? And most of the folks are in the agree part. Still in question 5, would people think the future should have housing affordable to a range of incomes, including lower? It was more spread out there. The next one, the city helps stabilize neighborhoods by preserving existing housing. That one was pretty spread out as well. The city helps increase home ownership opportunities with a wider range of household types. Mostly agree, but still pretty balanced. This still is the same future question. Should the city include higher density housing opportunities? It was pretty balanced throughout. The housing should fit and preserve the character of the existing community and protect critical environmental features. That one was strongly agree. That one, all of a sudden, we went out of balance, and that was a strongly agree. Young households, students, entry-level workers, that seemed to be pretty balanced. And there is more single-family housing for families. That was agree and neutral. Do you work in Issaquah? Most said no, but some said yes. For how many years? 10, 5 to 10 seemed to be the biggest category, and then your annual income. Pretty balanced, but to the higher. And then how much do you pay in mortgage and rent? And then which of the following best describes your current residence? And most of the folks are owning a single-family home or a condo. And those were the survey. Any questions on that? Or we'll make sure you get a copy of this so you can kind of ponder. But it was kind of fun to see the results. We were pretty happy that we got so many folks to, yes, Elizabeth.
In terms of the balance of homeowners to renters, does the survey reflect the distribution in the community, or is it out of?
It can tell us that by who registered, but we didn't have the time to try to correlate different things because we just received.
Okay, so you
results.
don't know what percentage of the people in Issaquah rent as opposed to own?
Oh, not of the survey, you mean just of Issaquah?
Yes, how does the...
I'm sure we know that. I don't know that right off the top of my head.
Because that might tell us something about the answers.
Right. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
You might get slightly different answers from people who own than you might get from renters.
Right, absolutely. And that's why we were trying to send the survey out to not only folks that lived here, but to folks that worked here, thinking that they would have some really good ideas on perhaps how to make their chances better of being able to live here if they wanted to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask something really quick. How did you decide to, how did the people here find the survey?
It was online, and we did email things off the website, and I emailed the boards and commissions that I had addresses to. We tried to hit everybody that we knew of that was already either affiliated with the city or was affiliated with any of the focus groups that we had, the small business, large businesses, school district, service providers, and realtors. We tried to sort of go out with as many directions as possible, knowing that it's just one type of outreach, and we're trying to do multiple types of outreach. But yeah, I'm sure we could have figured out other different ways, but it's a new survey tool that the city has, so I think this is one of the second or third surveys that the city's done. Any other questions? Okay. Strategies and actions. The first group of strategies and actions, oh good, perfect timing, are because, I'll back up a little bit. The council approved a temporary moratorium last September because they felt that in the work that we've done on the Central Issaquah plan in the last 3 years, they felt that it wasn't the developments that we were getting weren't completely in line with the vision that the council had going into the Central Issaquah plan. And one of the issues that they saw was that in all the housing that was being built in Central Issaquah, there weren't any affordable units yet that were being built. So they added affordable housing to the list of items that we're supposed to be studying during the moratorium, which was why when we first came to the Joint Commission on what strategies should we look at, the first group of strategies we looked at was affordable housing, to sort of get those in the think tank before we started looking at other strategies. And they're only a small part of the housing strategy. The housing strategy will be all types of housing, but it's just the part that council was most interested in getting the results sooner rather than later, which is why we started on that. And then, as I say in the little footnote, you get to look at the other strategies as well. but we just started with the affordable housing ones. Yes?
So what is the percentage of affordable housing that they decided on, and how did they define affordable housing?
Affordable housing is defined through the region through 80% of King County median income, which I think is one of the slides that's in the slide deck of all the data that we've received. And it starts at like 60 to 80% median income, and then there's the mid is goes up to the 60, and then low income. So there's 3 sort of levels, if you will, that are all affordable, but they're different levels of affordable. And then 100% is like market rate.
Okay, and so, okay, thank you. And will that match what is in the kind of the vision for Issaquah?
Yeah, we talk about it in the vision on trying to provide housing for 80% or below median, which would be the top range of what's considered affordable.
I mean,
that
I'm
help?
talking about percentages. So when you look at the percentages, will it match what we need in Issaquah in low and affordable housing?
The percentages of how much we need?
Yeah.
That can be part of our vision. I'm not sure that anyone in the region thinks that we can actually provide as much as we need, but it's an aspirational goal for all of us, for all the region, knowing how difficult it is to provide. And so I think all the jurisdictions that I've heard of lately, everyone's got the same issue, that they're trying to figure out another way to figure it out. In fact, Keith was just saying it made the cover of Governing magazine because they're figuring it out too. So we're sort of all in this together. But good questions. There's a lot of data involved in housing, so good question. This, I'm not sure if you're able to read the fine print, so I printed out. This was from, I didn't print this one out, I printed out the other two. This was from the January packet, and what we did here is the blue line up at the top are what you all said and the focus group said of the issues that you felt Issaquah faced. And then the data is in the orange or peach or whatever color it shows on the screen to show that there were 2 pieces of criteria we were basing what the affordable strategies on the left side, the actions, and the check marks show which actions meet all of the criteria that you mentioned and that the focus groups mentioned. And because this got so busy, and since some of you weren't here, we thought we'd show it in a different way, just to have everyone's brains explode. And I printed this out so we wouldn't all get eye strain. Do you want a copy? Going that way? I will keep a copy for my eyes. And what we did here is we took the strategies. The first one I'll use as an example, accessory dwelling units. And those are sometimes called mother-in-law apartments, sometimes carriage houses, sometimes granny flats. They have many names. But they're when you have a single-family home and you put another unit in it. You either put it in the house, in the garage, in the loft, somehow, but it has a bathroom, it has a kitchen, and it has a separate entrance. Those are very affordable. They're considered at the 80% level. And so one way of getting more affordable housing is if you have more ADUs, accessory dwelling units, in your community. We have at least 40 now in the city, and they seem to be working really well. So what I did here is so you all could see the discussion that went around the January meeting when the folks that were on the commission at that time talked about them. And most all of the comments that we had on ADUs was positive that night. There was one set of issues about do ADUs add more vehicles to the neighborhood, and can the infrastructure handle that between the roads and the parking? Are there any questions on accessory dwelling units, or how does this make any sense to try to remind us all of what you all talked about in January on the strategies? Yes.
So looking at ADUs, the idea that it is a lower, about an 80% adjusted median income as far as rents. I was looking into the information on Portland, which is known for its ADUs, and their rents are actually the same market rate for ADUs as other units. And
Could be.
so I would just put in a little question there as to whether or not this is an effective strategy for affordable housing, particularly low-income housing.
Right.
I think it serves other needs, but
Right, and
just put a
Issaquah's
question there.
rule is that they have to be smaller than the existing unit. So often, just the fact that they're smaller makes the price point lower than you would get in a regular rent. I'm not sure what Portland's, if they have that same kind of regulation, or if they can be as big. Yes, do you have an expert? You have to come up to the microphone, though. This is Arthur Sullivan, our housing expert from ARCH, a regional coalition for housing, for those of you that don't know Arthur yet.
Hi, everybody. You had a bad accident in town, so that's why I'm late, so sorry to be late. Fortunately, I was not in it. So on the ADU question, it is under the, quote, more affordable housing strategies, but you are correct in that they don't explicitly create affordable units. However, we've been looking at this issue for several decades, working for cities, and there are two elements that have tended to make accessory dwelling units affordable at 80% of median or less. Now, when we started doing this, average rents were more like 80 to 90% of median, and now they're closer to 100% of median. So the overall market has changed. But just sort of a couple things from research that have been done on accessory dwelling units, and I don't know, I'd have to look at Portland a little more carefully in more recent years, but the cities in East King County, including Issaquah, require owner occupancy of one of the two homes. Also, there is a size limitation on the size of the accessory dwelling units. The general research has shown over the years that for the same square footage, an accessory dwelling unit will typically rent for about 20% less, 15 to 20% less than that same square footage in a commercially operated multifamily unit. And it's partially because of kind of just how they operate. They're more mom and pop operated. I can anecdotally say I used to own one, and my wife would not allow us to raise the rent on our tenant because she liked the tenant and we shared dog sitting with each other. But I also knew many people in the Berkeley area where I used to own mine that there are stories like that all over the place. That accessory dwelling units are a little bit different in how they behave, and they have a tendency for what they are to be less expensive than what you see in commercial properties.
okay.
Any other questions on that? Is it helpful? Yes.
Since you're up there, can I ask you about rent control? And I know Seattle is looking into that, and New York City has it in some sections. And so, if we're trying to do we're trying to incentivize people to live and work in Issaquah, is there anything on the kind of on the table to do some kind of rent control for people who actually work in the city, or is that not a viable strategy?
I don't think the word is viable. The word is legal.
Not legal?
It's not legal. This state has a law against rent control, with the one exception being that if you provide public funding, or if you have a land use program like you have, in which a developer is required to have units at a certain affordability level, those are exempt from the state rent control laws. But other than that, in the general market, you're not allowed in this state to do rent control. It's a statewide law. And that was adopted, I don't know, after whatever city maybe tried to consider doing it.
Thank you.
Okay. Is it helpful to go through as a reminder of parts of the discussion? Should I just keep going? Number 2 was to support preservation of existing affordable housing, and most of our affordable housing has covenants, as Arthur mentioned, where it's either a 30-year covenant or a 50-year covenant. But there's some, let's say, excuse me, like in Old Town, there's just some darling little bungalows that are affordable, but they don't have a covenant on them because they're older, they're smaller. And so those would be units that we would want to preserve somehow, but we don't have that control that a covenant gives us, that you have 30 years of the affordability of the rent or the mortgage not to change. So that's something that came up as all positive, except we just don't always know which units might be lost because they're just either single-family units that are owned privately that all of a sudden someone could buy them and decide to tear them down and put up something else. So the problem with that is we don't always know when there's a chance that we could jump in to try and buy it, save it, do something like that. Number 3 was the housing levy, to propose a housing levy. And this is to sort of share the cost of affordable housing, not only with the developers that build housing, but also with the community at large. It would be sort of an extra tax that the council and everyone would have to vote on, but that would provide funding that we could buy land for housing. We could get into a partnership with developers to build affordable housing. We would have an extra bit of funding to help in whichever way we thought helped us the best as a city. So that was on the table, and most folks thought that was a good idea, other than we would have to really look at, what we would use the money for, that kind of thing. And number 4 was transit-oriented development, including multifamily tax exemption. That's something that we're in the midst of trying right now through our economic development department. So this is pretty exciting that we're starting to sort of dive into this one. This would be putting housing near the transit center and trying to provide for incentives so that there would be more affordable units in that project. Number 5 is to inclusionary zoning, is that in certain areas of town, in the central Issaquah area specifically, if a developer comes in to build housing, they have to build a certain percentage of them as affordable. No one has built in central Issaquah yet since that regulation was adopted, but we're thinking of either raising that to require more housing, or to make that requirement in the rest of central Issaquah, or even in the rest of the city. We haven't figured that out, but it seemed like a good idea to just have it right on the books that it's required. If you build housing in Issaquah, you have to build some affordable housing with that project. So I don't think there were any. There was one potential concern is you have to make sure that you don't make it so that you discourage anybody from building, was the one comment. And were there any more on that one? Was at the bottom of the page? I can't read what's on the bottom of the page. Okay, and the next one, so those were all the comments that you all had in January. And here's yet a new chart. I can tell you're loving these charts. I also printed this one out. This one actually has the problem statements at the top to try to focus us on, which actions that are affordable are in the black printing. Those are the ones you all talked about in January. And tonight, we're going to talk about the 3 new ones. And these refer to other housing, not just affordable. They could be affordable, but they're sort of going beyond the affordable options that we talked about in January. And those are, some of them you actually did talk about in January. Changing the zoning and building code to provide opportunities for single-room occupancy, or mini units, or different kinds of housing types, which we don't have right now. Also to allow like cottages and different infill kinds of projects in single-family areas perhaps. And also different housing options and services to allow seniors to stay in their homes. Yes.
You know me, I always have a question.
No, that's good.
I know that the council, so we've not the council, we've provided approval on a number of high-density housing. There's some permits out there that have not been used yet. Retroactively, could we go back and ask for, provide incentives? So this is just, so I don't know much about
Right.
this, but I'm just asking. Could we go back and provide incentives for them to actually build affordable housing? Because the concern for us is, and it took me 20 minutes to drive 3 miles today, is that the infrastructure is already so strained. And so we've already approved all this high-density housing, and we're adding more to this, to a strained infrastructure. And so can we go back and say, rather than building new units, this is talk to the developers that are already going to build new units and provide incentives to change kind of that conversation so that we accomplish this as well as, you know,
Right.
they use their permits, so.
Right. If we've already approved a permit with an applicant, the only way, because it's sort of a contract between them and with us, the only way we would be able to modify something like that is if it was a mutual, either they came to us and said, we would like to amend whatever it is, we'd like a new unit, we'd like commercial, we'd like, and then we could say, well, if you would like that, then we would like this. But once they have their permit, they're pretty much good to go. And unless we were to contact them and say, hey, we had this great idea, I mean, they don't have to entertain it at all.
Right, but we can in fact
But
give
we
them
could-
incentives to.
Right. Do you have
so I-
something on that?
I was going to say, I mean, that is a possibility. I think one of the things to think about, especially with newly built, is that the financing they received is based on the projections of rents and such. And so maybe a little more challenging. So I don't think the subsidy that the city can provide may be able to make up what is necessary there. So I think it's more effective thinking about going forward and looking at, because typically when you're looking at affordable housing, there's many sources of money coming in as opposed to just what the city could provide. So it's an interesting idea, but it may also be something to think about for preservation of, if there are units that have been on the market for, or have been built for a while, thinking about, you know, is there an opportunity to make sure that they don't rise as fast as some other ones. But I think for newer ones, it's a little more challenging. So it doesn't mean it can never happen, but you know, part of this is you want to try to find the things that are going to be the most bang for your buck, the most ability to do things, so.
Okay, thank you.
Should I go back to that? Okay. It didn't seem like there were any comments. Any more questions on that one? Okay. Were there any, I don't want you guys to be shy, were there any comments on the affordable housing ones? For those of you that weren't here, or even those of you that were here? On that first list? Yes.
What do you mean comments or questions? Like basically, do we approve, what do we think of ADUs versus MFTEs, et cetera?
Right, or do you see something that just doesn't sound right at all to you, that you think there's an issue with one of them, or that something just doesn't make any sense, or something is, we should put all our eggs in one basket kind of thing?
I have some concerns about the cost-benefit ratio for the multifamily tax exemptions as far as the number of units that it would provide compared to the cost, because when you're looking at that, you're looking at giving the developer a 12-year tax exemption for the entire building, even though they're only putting in 20 to 25% affordable. First of all, I would really, really want that to be low income rather than affordable, because I think what we've seen in the data is that we have a huge deficit in the 50% AMI range and not as much in the 80% range. And so I think we need to focus our push on that area. But as far as that, I'd like to know a little bit more information. I looked a little bit into Seattle's kind of the tax that they wouldn't be collecting compared to the number of units that they've been able to grow. And it was fairly expensive per unit to make that difference. And I'd like to compare that to the potential for you know, even without the housing levy, for the city to acquire land and what the cost per unit would be there if we did something like we did with the YWCA, where we're gifting or providing low-cost land to a group that's going to provide much more housing.
Right.
So, Trish, maybe I could comment a little bit.
Sure.
So, thanks, Lindsay. So for those of you who are new, part of the description of this is, you know, there really isn't one tool that's going to solve this problem. It's really kind of populating a toolbox with a lot of different strategies that, you know, potentially all of them are going to provide different types of housing opportunities. And, you know, I agree, there's need at every income level. I think part of what we've talked about is that creating a city with a diverse housing stock is one of our kind of top goals. And that's anything from market rate housing down to housing for homeless, right? And so these different tools give us different opportunities. And I think what we talked about was, if we feel as a group comfortable with everything on the list, not as anyone as a silver bullet, but as a group of strategies, then we would forward that to the city council and let them then chew on the rationale. Because you're right, I mean, the different tools are going to have, you know, you don't want to use a screwdriver to try and pound something into a wall. But there might be a hammer in there that would work better. And similarly, some of these, depending on what we're really trying to achieve, might work better for certain things, like very low income. You know, the city purchasing land or MFTE could be a better tool than maybe trying to get ADUs, because I agree with you, the ADU might or might not be affordable at the end of the day, and it'll change over time, is kind of the rationale. You know, maybe at one point it's market, but then it's place for your kids to hang out and you don't charge them anything. I don't know. So I think Arthur has something to say too.
You were sort of getting at what I wanted to sort of put out there to the group, is that what we're trying to do right now, and this is what we began at the last meeting, and we just sort of want to just redo it again because several of you weren't here, is we're sharing you the kind of comments we heard. These are strategies, and as Keith said, we're not looking for one strategy here. We're looking for these range of strategies. What are your perspectives when you hear about them? And those can be perspectives of, do they, you know, reinforce some of the areas? Yes, this could really, I see that this could help address this need. We're trying to hear from you representing a different cross-section of the community. Your response is when you hear those, oh, that sounds like a good idea because it might address this need. And then the other is, we're not writing the ADU ordinance here with this group. We're not writing the MFT ordinance, but your comments would say, if the council wants to proceed with those, what are things that should be done as part of the evaluation? So yours is a perfect example. And yes, every city we've helped with MFTE, we've done this elaborate chart that shows how much you're giving, how much you're getting, and stuff like that. So we're looking for those, both of those kind of comments. That's why you see there's pros. That's sort of the why is it a fit in the community. And then the others are the issues or potential things to deal with. And we just thought we should revisit those for each of these topics before we jump into the new ones. Because, as I said, there's some new people, and you maybe have had a chance to think about it since the last meeting. So that's all we're trying to do right now. We're not trying to get to a bottom line conclusion per se. We're trying to just get your thoughts so that so that the council can hear other perspectives as they're deliberating as we advance this report to them. Okay?
I had one comment. I've been talking with people about affordable housing and development, and one of the things that I'm hearing from people is that development is happening very rapidly, and that it seems that even if you required affordable units from the developers, it would not discourage them from building in this area, because it seems like everybody wants to develop something on the east side. So if we discourage them even a little, it might help us to catch up with the infrastructure.
So just one overall thought about that as the economic development director for the city is, so part of the problem of affordable housing is supply and demand, right? So the more housing you have, it has to compete with less buyers, and therefore the housing typically is not as high priced. The less available housing units we have, the higher the price will be, because there will be less stock for people to actually purchase. So it actually, to slow growth, actually pushes up housing costs. So that's economics.
Okay.
But you might at least get some balance.
So, couple things here. When talking about affordable housing, there is what I call a la carte affordable housing, and then you have full services affordable housing. What's your preference on full services versus a la carte, and should we include policy verbiage to require full services?
Could you explain a little more what you mean by a la carte versus full service?
So a la carte would be a development of affordable housing where the people simply pay the rent.
Mhm.
And then you have full services that also include things like child care services, social services. They may have counselors on hand to help people with life needs,
Workforce training.
workforce training, things like that. Because when you get into affordable housing, sometimes you also have other issues that are, or other stresses on that segment of the population. And so not everybody who's in affordable housing
Okay.
is there because they just can't get a job. Maybe it's because there's other issues as well.
So what do other people have reaction to that question before I make any comments?
I mean, I think we need both. If we're looking at the Highlands, which I know well, we have the full services down with the YWCA. We also have various individual arch subsidized houses throughout that provide just the a la carte. So I think I would be in support of both within the city.
Other thoughts and reactions? Generally, I'll put a sort of qualifying statement out that if you recall, we use the term moderate income, which is median income now is $96,000 for a family of 4. So we're getting close to a nice round number to be able to start thinking about the math. A household that we consider moderate is going to be 80% of that figure, and for a smaller family, it won't be the full 96. It'll be more like 80,000. It's like 80 to almost 100,000 is sort of the median income for a small versus a large household. So at 80% of median, you're looking at about 80,000 down to about 60, 65,000 if it's a single person. Okay, and for lower income, that's 50% of median. So you're looking at $30,000 to $45,000 a year. Another way to translate that in your head pretty easily is the magical $15 an hour number you see thrown around a lot. If somebody had a $15 an hour job full-time, it would be $30,000 a year. Okay, just simple little figures to have in your head. About 40% of all households are going to be under 80% of median income as we grow. In other words, as a community grows from all the jobs they have, they will generate new households. That doesn't mean that might be who's living in the town, because if you only have big homes, you're not going to see that. But as your workforce grows, you're going to typically see about 40% of your households will be in that moderate or low income range. So often when we're dealing with housing affordability, we are dealing with people who are working, or we might be dealing with students, we might be dealing with seniors on fixed income, and they're all falling under one of those income categories. When you start getting into the services, you're generally dealing with households who were probably well below 50% of median income. They may be unemployed, they may have gone through a health crisis, they may have gone through a number of things, they may be homeless, or they may be very close to being homeless. And we just had an interview with a number of service agencies, and one of the comments they have made is that the general increase in housing costs in the region have put more and more households in a housing tenuous situation long term. Not short term like it used to be, they used to experience, but long term. And as they experience that, the kind of issues that Ron talked about start to emerge and grow because of the pressure that they're under to survive day to day. And so what we have been doing in the last 10 years is for people who are lower income, there have been more interest in getting programs associated with housing so that people can maybe help be in a more stable environment for a period of time so they can get back on their feet and get back and be more independent going into the future. So that's to give a little context. So usually the a la carte is for the more at 50 and 60, 80% of median or even higher, like first-time homeowners. You all are seeing what the home prices are. You mentioned the arch units, which are really City of Issaquah units created through the Issaquah Highlands development. Some of those are targeted to households at median income because the market new units are at 120, 150% of median. So this goes back to Keith's comment earlier that there's such a wide range of needs, which I think the data that you saw was showing you. And so the city has looked at different types of strategies because of different needs. But generally, when the services are there, you're targeting towards households who are under 50% and often well below 50%. And the more a la carte are in the 40 and up % of median income. And sometimes they're targeted to seniors and sometimes not. But that just sort of distinguishes you from the comment you made and you wanted to follow up, it looks like.
So the question comes for, in looking at the median income that's at 50%, if we cater to that audience, we decide to do that, if we do not offer full services for that segment, and maybe that's the only segment we target for full services, then we would be putting possibly undue burden on other city resources to support that target audience and not enabling that specific community to be successful because we're depriving them of those resources. So we're providing a place for them to live, but not a way or means to be successful. So,
Okay. And again, I think what my comment would be is at 50% of median income, what you're describing might be true for, I don't know, 20% of households, maybe a little bit more, and some of them might benefit from light touches of services support. If you're at 30% of median, that percentage is likely to be higher, okay? 50% of median right now is $45,040, let's see, 96 divided by 2, so $48,000 for a family of 4. So there's probably a lot of people who are earning that who are doing, you know, fairly stable lifestyle. But I think the point you're making is, are we conscious of that need in the housing that is being created and supported when it's explicitly targeted to a certain income level? Is that maybe a fair way to represent what you're saying?
yeah, I don't want to abandon those people. If we say, okay, we're going to allow this community to exist, I want to give them the means and resources to be successful, because when you're at the 50 range or 45,000, when we may think, wow, 45,000 seems like a lot, but try living on that, and if you just sneeze, you're backwards.
Right.
Sometimes having those resources keeps that person moving forward as opposed to having a potential catastrophe.
Right. Okay. Yes.
So, so how do you restrict to people that live and work in the who work in this city? So we've got cities that are a number of cities that are within 20 miles of us, right? And so potentially we could take ourselves into a place where we're solving this problem for a bunch of cities, right?
Right.
And so I know that there is some collaboration. So I mean, in your experience, how do you restrict that to Issaquah, on people who work in Issaquah without getting into any, legal kind of situations?
That is kind of a tricky, that's a great question, and it's one I come up against a lot or deal with, that gets brought a lot. And part of it is I volunteered to come to this organization when it was formed. And it was formed by Bellevue, who said, wouldn't we all benefit if everybody on the east side was working on housing and had the resources within the government to help them work on housing issues? Because a task force just very similar to yours concluded that Just because a building is over the city boundary in Bellevue doesn't mean Bellevue isn't benefiting, or if Bellevue's the only city doing something and the other cities aren't, then is that benefiting them? And so the whole idea behind ARCH is the YWCA had funding from 10 cities in East King County. Now, Issaquah has helped fund the project in Bellevue. So we have moved our money around with the goal of making housing happen in every city. Okay, so we want to make sure the philosophy of the cities, and this was formed by the cities, is we all need to try to do stuff, okay, both, and all these different types of tools. Do we go as far as saying, let's fine tune it and say, we want to, do we get people from our community? That's a trickier question. What we have done is tried to work with the agencies to market locally when they have opportunities. The YWCA, we actually, and we're going back and we're asking the developments that we funded, are the people coming from this area when you create the affordable housing? What we have tried to do in the past is have them market to local businesses when they are opening and stuff like that. That's getting tougher to do under the Fair Housing Act. And so there is some issues that are rising there, but we've been very conscious that the reason we're at this table is a local need. So what are we doing to try to have the solutions we do address local needs? A certain amount is just naturally. Who wants to drive into this traffic if they don't have to, right? So what we are finding is generally we think people are coming from the communities in which the housing is created. Or maybe they didn't live here, but they work here a lot of times. But it is something we're always conscious of, but because we're getting funding assistance from the county and the state, they're also like, they don't love you to sort of be explicitly restrictive to one community where people can come from. But we have tried to find ways, and we are actually going out this year and surveying because this kind of question does come up. But the main way we do it is doing outreach to local businesses when buildings are being filled up and try to reach out locally and to make that be the case, because we do understand that's what's motivating this conversation. Okay?
So I want to reinforce one point, and I want to make a new point. The point I want to reinforce is a point she made earlier about rent. So I've heard the nightmare stories of rent literally getting doubled as soon as your lease ends. And I understand rent control is legal in Washington, but this is something I would be happy to deliberate. I think we should deliberate more on.
Okay.
The other point I wanted to make, I don't see it here, is one of the price drivers for house prices, and this basically affects everybody, not just middle-income families, is foreigners from, especially right now, Vancouver, that don't live here, that don't have a work visa, coming here and buying property all cash. And this is very pronounced. It's become very pronounced in recent times in some localities like, the Highlands where I live. They buy the property, they sign a lease right there, they leave the country. And as you know, Vancouver, they included a 15% tax, which is basically driving them further south. They used to come to the Bay Area, now they're here. And this is something I think we should talk about.
Okay. I'm working in 4 cities right now, and this point has come up by groups like yours in every city on the east side. So I don't know, maybe there'll be enough of this being raised as a question. So that's what we're trying to do tonight is, we've given you the 4, or 5, was there 4? Or however many for affordable housing. And what you're sort of jumping ahead on the agenda, but that's fine, which is, did we miss anything? So it's good that you're bringing these general issues up, but please also feel free to comment on any of the ones on this matrix as well, okay? Be specific about that, but the general comments are helpful as well. So there's more, yes, Ron?
One very quick one here for affordable housing before we move on. And do we as a group want to discuss affordable housing for first responders and for teachers? Now, I understand the laws and so on for first responders is going to be different from teachers, and that teachers can be funded different ways. So maybe having affordable housing plan for these audiences might go through a nonprofit or some other means, but maybe we should include that into our discussion because it'd be great if our teachers could live here. I think they would like it, and I think our students would like it, and I think that might be absent from our current discussions.
Okay. How do others feel about that comment?
I'm hearing that there's a lot of turnover in teachers because teachers have to commute so far in order to find a place that they can live. And traffic is not good, and the stress causes them to leave very quickly.
So I'm going to ask, Trish is going to show you the matrix with the 3, and I'm going to ask for that comment, it's noted, but to be held, and when we have the full list up there, I'm going to then ask you the question, are any of these strategies, when you add the affordable plus the general ones that might in particular help address that point, that need? Okay? I don't want to limit it to just this part of the list because I think there might be some stuff on the other part of the list that would also help address that. So I want to at least, in other words, say, I want to take your statement one step further and say, and of the strategies that we've been talking about, here are some that might be ways to address that.
I know I've asked you questions in the past about that, and I'm taking all those answers that you've given me into that framework that I just mentioned, so I still remember all those things.
Right, okay.
Appreciate it, thanks.
Okay, all right. Other comments on the affordable before we shift over and add the other strategies to the conversation?
So what I understand that what we're trying to do right now is you want us to comment on these 6 and say whether we like these tools or whether any of these 6 have things that we might be concerned about. Is that
Right, or
accurate?
if you are going to look in these more, here are things we want you to think harder about.
Yep. So I think the one I just look at is number 2. If you take Keith's point on supply and demand, that would, supporting the preservation as is of affordable housing would restrict supply. So I would modify that to maybe say, if there is an affordable unit, put a covenant that says what comes into that next could have more units, but those need to be affordable units. Otherwise, you're just kind of going to be stuck in place with bungalows and not enough supply.
So what you're saying is a sub-element of number 2 could be saying preservation might be in allowing redevelopment, but you're replacing,
Yes.
not just have to keep the thing as is.
Yes, because otherwise, you're just going to end up with a really old bungalow, and people aren't
Okay?
going to want that.
Right. There may be times we're keeping
Doesn't
the
solve the
building,
problem.
because another example of preservation would be, and we haven't had cities do that around here too much, is here's a neighborhood that we're going to allow more in. But how you're going to, who did this? I went back, it was not Arlington, but Alexandria, Virginia. No, it was Arlington, Virginia. And what they did is they had an area right around their new rail stations for Metro. And there's a base zoning. And then they said, if you want it, and it had a lot of housing there already, like garden-style apartments and stuff. And they said, there's a couple different ways you can go higher than that base zoning. And one of those is you can buy air rights from another building, and then that building will get preserved. And we've toured a couple. So but the point I'm hearing from you is think about the idea of still having growth occur, but preserving opportunities that are there. Okay, all right? Others? I did, okay, Ron, go ahead.
Sorry, quick question
And
for
then-
number
and then
1,
Vicky.
ADUs. Does an ADU have to be a separate dwelling, or can it be part of the primary building?
Actually, almost the vast majority of the time, they're part of the primary building. Most ADUs are not separate. Costs too much. Most people find it's very easy to carve out space in a house to work for an ADU.
Well, ADU could also be a room for rent.
An ADU must be a legally separate, to be an ADU, you can rent out rooms. People can rent out rooms, and that's just, people can do that. But an ADU is when you go through the effort of creating a separate legal unit from a point. It might not be legally separate in terms of being able to be sellable, but it's firewall separated, and it has cooking, and it has bathing facilities. It has all living needs independent of the rest of the house.
So I'm thinking on Squaw Mountain, because we have a lot of single-story units that have daylight basements.
Correct.
Daylight basements have 7-foot ceilings.
Yes.
You put sheetrock on it,
Yes.
it becomes a
Correct.
6.5-foot ceiling. Is
Right.
that
Could be.
legally, would that be legally considered as a ADU, or the ceiling?
If you go and get the permit and do enough firewall separation, you could potentially make daylight basements are a prime opportunity for, the town where I own mine was a hillside community, and most of the ADUs were in daylight basements in the basement area that had been, they took the base, right? I mean, everybody knows the layout. You take that bathroom on the lower level and those 2 rooms that are in each side of it, and boy, it's real easy with not a whole lot of cost to create a separate unit from that. So it is very common, split level. All of you can probably envision how you can do that one. I mean, so yes, most of them are just carved out of existing living space and existing units, using primarily existing plumbing with minor, some plumbing modifications. But the main thing is you have to have the cooking, you must have the bathing, and you must have fire separation. And there's probably some other technical, but those are the main ones. And then you must have at least, most cities say, you must have at least 1 more parking space than is required under the code for that house. Now, most homes already have that. You have more than, so if the code requires 2 and you have somehow 4 parking spaces in your driveway, you meet the requirement. So those are generally what the basic rules are to create an ADU. There's some other subtleties like design features if you do an addition or something, kind of things and stuff. So you wanted to make a comment earlier.
Yes, thanks. I also had a follow-up question on the ADUs. So is the strategy to somehow support addition of ADUs into existing structures, or would it be encouraging developers to develop, when they develop new homes, to also include ADUs? I'm just wondering what the mechanism is for encouraging ADUs in the strategy.
What do people think? Good question.
So I think because ADUs serve multiple purposes, in addition to affordable housing, they allow flexibility for the owner as they age and perhaps their kids move out. They can move into the smaller unit and rent out the larger unit. It provides that flexibility of additional income and things like that. So I think it's very important to think about it in existing homes. It also helps with the preservation when we're looking at the valley floor. Yeah, I think most of the housing addition that we're going to get is going to be, apartments and things like that that are higher density. So we wouldn't be able to include ADUs in that.
So I think that's often the story behind ADUs. But let me tell the story about the new and see what you think of that. In new, if a builder knows the community allows ADUs, it's pretty inexpensive while you're building a unit to think about how could I lay this house out so that in the future it could very easily accommodate an ADU. So I had a friend in Mercer Island who essentially rebuilt their house. And as they rebuilt it, they were thinking about the parents, and they're going, I want an ADU, I want her to have a space. So as they designed the house, they designed it to be incorporated. In fact, another city, a commissioner said, maybe we should require new built homes to be plumbed so that they could have an ADU. That was an idea from one commission. Kind of it. So, yes.
So all the friends I have that have something that could be an ADU, they use Airbnb, and so in high cost areas, the amount of money you can make off of Airbnb is much higher than an ADU. So that would be a consideration here.
Okay, so we'll make a note, if you do ADUs, is there a side issue of the Airbnb short-term use, and what does the city think about? We don't have to solve that tonight. We can make that an issue out there, okay? Any others up here? Because I want to take all night on this. I want to get us to the new ones, too.
Number 6 is blank on the handout that I have. Evaluate/consider efforts to remove barriers to condo development.
Right.
Is that part of this discussion or our upcoming discussion?
That should, I think, I don't know how, that is on the affordable one, but it really, I think, is as much appropriate for the new ones. But the reason it's blank, I'm not sure why it's blank, but I know what it means. And maybe that could be the great transition to the new ones if you want. Or someone dying, because we can still come back to the first 6 and stuff, but if you don't have a dying need to say something right this moment on the affordable ones, we could use his question as a transition and do that one as the first one under the land use sort of or the broader housing needs issue. People okay with that? Okay, so this one is, and do you have a slide that you have with the new ones so we can jump to that? You were going to ask me to go through those, right? Is this one work?
Yeah,
this
so
one
it's
works.
6 on that one.
Right. So, okay. So for this one, remove barriers to condo development. Does anyone know the story behind what's the story here? Okay. So the story here is, at least this is the story we hear, is that the kind of condominiums that were being built up until the recession are not getting built. And what I mean by that is, like in Issaquah Highlands, there's a number of condo developments that were built up there, and that are the same kind of buildings as the new rental housing that you're seeing built now. And we're not seeing that. We are still seeing high-end condos being built, like in downtown Seattle or in downtown Bellevue. You're still seeing those kind of condos built. And what we've heard is, the reason is they're so high up on the market that the builders can afford the really expensive insurance costs to deal with condo association liability. Okay? But for the kind of condos that were built, the issue that we're hearing is out there is that in this state, the condo liability laws to the builders are written in a way that puts them at jeopardy that within a 10-year period, they will be sued and therefore, and be liable for the workmanship of the buildings, and therefore, they can't get the insurance, or it's so hard to do that they're just not building it. And given where interest rates are being so low, rental housing is doing well. Before the recession, when rates were a little bit higher, the condo builders were all building, and there was no rental housing being built because the economics often works better. So the whole issue appears to be around this state's condo liability law, and builders therefore making it difficult for them to consider building something, which from my background and looking at everything going on in the market, I can't understand why condos aren't being built. It doesn't seem to be a market demand issue, okay? It seems to be that, and so it seems believable what they're saying. During the recession when they say that, yeah, well, maybe they're just saying that because they're trying to make their life easier. But right now you go, they're still not building them, but you are seeing townhomes being built because those are built as fee simple, so they're not necessarily condominium associations. So here is a form of housing that has become, in East King County, since I've been here, that's the first form of ownership for people, is condominiums. And we're not seeing it built right now. And so the idea here is, do cities get behind and tell legislators, we have this big gap in our market that is not being met? And it seems that maybe legislation is part of the reason why. And should we do something? Or maybe it's been a tough one for the legislators because the attorneys come in and say, no, we're protecting consumers, okay? So as with many issues, there's two sides to it. But that's what the story is behind this one. And so there's nothing explicitly for the city to do at this moment other than to maybe get behind the issues that the builders are saying they're having with that issue, okay?
Very high level, what's the difference between a condo and a townhouse?
A townhome can be a condo. A condo is when you don't own the ground. Condo is when you own, you don't even own the building. You own the air within the paint and in of your unit. And the association owns the building, and and that's why you pay dues to take care of the building and stuff. So you own your unit, but you don't own the grounds and you don't own the infrastructure of the property. Whereas in a townhouse, the way they're building them is they are subdividing them into individual units, or if I think, it might also be if you keep the number of units under a certain size, and I'm not sure, I haven't followed the legislation closely enough. But with a townhome, you often own the dirt underneath your unit, and you own the whole building and the shell. Okay?
But they may look the same.
Right.
So the thing is it's a paper difference. It's, you know, you may walk down a street and there may be no visible difference between a condominium and a townhouse project. It's whether or not the townhouses, as Arthur said, are typically on platted lots. So every individual unit has a piece of dirt that you own underneath it, whereas on a condominium, you own that dirt in common with all your neighbors.
Right. And also, obviously, then when you go to stacked flats, you know, flats, one above the other, obviously that can't be a townhouse. That's got to be a condominium. So they've been able to, in some cities, been able to get around it when you use a townhouse, you know, up and down configuration. But the kinds that you saw up in Issaquah Highlands that were being built, and that we saw, you know, downtown Redmond, several of those buildings are condos that were built, but none of them are now. The new ones are all rental, whereas in the pre-2010, several of those were built even as flats as condominiums. Okay? And that's probably where the biggest gap is where in all this new development that's now at sort of the 4-story type stuff, none of that in the last 3 years or 4 years has been ownership.
So there is a way to build a stacked flat project as an apartment, as a rental unit, and actually turn it into a condominium later. So after that liability time lapses, you can do that, but you have to build it a certain way to start so that you can then segregate it out individually later. So it takes a game plan, and right now, I think, as Arthur mentioned, because rents are so high right now, most builders aren't looking long lens and thinking about that as they build right now. It's build it as cheap as you can, charge as much as you can.
When I was a developer in the 80s in California, we built rental housing to condo standards so that we could do what Keith is just describing. So you have to build it, as you said, you have to build it differently. But it doesn't feel like the builders are doing that right now.
They're not.
Okay.
Arthur, is it safe to say that condos are part of a more comprehensive housing mix and should be a part of any successful affordable housing community?
Is that a statement or a question?
I guess it's a question. I kind of heard you stating it.
Okay, so you think I made a statement. What do other people think? I mean, how do you react to if you think I made a statement, how do you react to the statement?
Okay, I'll play this. I think you made that statement. I agree with that statement. I would say, from personal experience, I think pointing to like Los Angeles, big city, expensive city, very spread out. But I think one thing that keeps it relatively affordable as we look to move my mother-in-law back there is there are condos, and you can purchase those. So she won't be saddled with rent increases, right? She will get a mortgage. We will get a mortgage for her. She'll have a place, and that will be the thing, and at the end of it, you actually own something versus 30 years of just paying rent. So I think it's, the other benefits obviously is they tend to be smaller units.
Okay.
So if we have a difference in mix and we're lacking in the 1 and 2 bedroom things for home ownership, this allows you to get in and actually own something and build equity. So I think it's essential.
So Arthur, one suggestion here as we're talking this through, because it seems like most of the group is liking condos as a part of a diverse housing stock. So besides the lobbying efforts that we can do in Olympia, maybe one other thing that we can do is look to see if there is a permitting disincentive for building it to condo standards from the get-go. Because if there is, maybe the city can look at ways of lowering those barriers so that if I'm a builder and I could basically, if it's just the cost of the materials and there's no additional like permitting fees or impact fees or anything else, maybe that's a way to potentially help facilitate.
Okay, so I want to put Keith's comment, but I want to make sure that what his statement was is true in your mind. I don't want to put words in your mouth yet. I sort of did. So you asked kind of 2 questions. You led in by making the statement about it could be part of a continuum of needs. So the first question to you is, and I think, we showed you data showing a wide range of needs. A basic question is, should the strategy overall try to achieve a continuum of housing types in the community, or should we focus on certain types? And the continuum can be at two levels. One is cost, and the other is type of housing choices. So let me put that question out and see if we get affirmation on that general point, and then I want to come back to does ownership condos fit in that series. But first, let's talk about the big picture so we see if there's consensus on that point, or not, or if there's a different perspective on that.
If we look at the urban core, then we would be looking at condos, right? Because you can't do townhouses and do high density, and we're almost out of real estate in terms of doing single-family homes or duplex type lots. So looks like about the only way we could move forward would be condos, unless they're apartments. And doing a condo at least gets people owning and gets moving in the right financial direction. So we have a choice.
Okay, so you're answering the second question first. First, I want to I want to make sure, and if we're good with the first one, I don't need to belabor it, but I got the group here. I want to first talk on the continuum, and you've made a really compelling argument for the condo one, and let's come back to that. But I want to first take care of the continuum question, because our job here is to document for the council your thoughts. And so you've raised a really good question that I want to make sure I see what perspectives and range. Yes?
I think with regards to the continuum, I mean, just from personal experience, I lived in Southern California where, real estate is very high, or not high end, but just expensive. So you get pushed out, and our first property was a condo. It got us into the market, it got us collateral to the point where we moved up here. When we sold it, we had enough for a down payment to now go on to a townhouse. With that said, we just had a baby. Now we're starting to outgrow it, and we're gonna have to now move towards to a single family home. So I mean, I can see this, a condo being a part of this whole continuum where, it kind of cycles, and then by the time you have your single family home and you're now an empty nester, you want to downsize, and what do? Then a lot of people go back to having condos, because then they don't want to have to deal with mowing their own lawn or dealing with roofing or whatever. So you go back to a condo where all you have to do is, downsize in terms of your mortgage, and then you just pay an association and it gets taken care of.
Okay.
So I think in terms of that, there's a cycle that maybe if there's not a lot of stock or market for condos, it's something to, explore, look into.
Any other comments about the continuum? Yes.
I'm fine with building condos as long as you don't build it in the Highlands. I'm joking. No, so two obvious points. One is we are already strained on infrastructure, like we already pointed out. We don't have enough roads, we don't have enough schools, and condos means packing more people in the same area. That's for one. The second thing is the obvious thing. You want to sense if there's enough demand. There's enough condos that are in Bellevue and Seattle that are sitting vacant. So
Do you have
I might have to get data,
Right.
but that statement definitely was true, I know, 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. 2 or 3 years ago is not today.
Actually,
The world
that-
has changed significantly. Yes.
So actually, I had that on my list of what is the occupancy rate right now for apartments and for smaller condos.
Okay.
Any idea what it is?
So I'm not going to do that off the top of my head.
Sorry.
But we have that kind of information, and in general, vacancy rates have been going way down in the last couple years, to a point where that's why we're seeing a longer rental construction period than we've probably seen in a really long time, and part of that's because vacancies haven't been moving. And part of the reason they think vacancies haven't been moving is because there aren't condos being built. So people don't have the ability. You mentioned you got into the market with a condo, but you still have to save up a down payment, and you still need that first rental unit. I mean, the ladder starts before ownership for most people. They don't jump right into ownership. Yes?
Just as anecdotal, I work at a apartment community here in Issaquah. We have 125 units, and we're currently working through a waiting list of 50 people that we have had for a year. Just as anecdotal for rental capacity.
Yeah, Arthur, I was, on your question about the continuum or the suite of solutions, I mean, if I just go back and look at the mission statement for the housing strategy that we worked through, and I think it's still good, even after all this discussion, I think it's still valid. And it includes, you know, the words, providing a diversity of choices to meet the needs of people who choose to live, work, and play in Issaquah. And I think in order to do that, you have to have that continuum.
Okay.
So, I'm just.
Okay, great. All right. So I've heard sort of, yeah, look at the mission statement. We've been sort of saying that. I'd like to revisit some of those things once in a while to make sure as you get into this more, you still feel the same way. So that's why I asked the question. I wasn't assuming, you know, but this is, we want to keep reiterating from the beginning what's the core of where we're coming from. So now the condo, I've heard a number of arguments for condominiums, and I've heard, but a careful part of condominiums, which is related to a comment we heard earlier, is infrastructure. So if you're going to do density, do where density's right, but if density's okay, condos can be part of an answer. More to add about condos, or should we jump to the next one? And again, we can keep coming back as we go, but anything right at the moment? Yes.
So I think we recognize that the Central Issaquah Plan has a goal of density in the valley floor. And so if we're going to do that, it would be more supportive of the workers and the people who are choosing to live here to be able to have ownership availability with condos rather than fill it completely with apartments.
Great. So I think that's saying what you said a few minutes ago, right, Ron? You were saying the same thing. So that's, I'm hearing that in particular for Central Issaquah, it would be good to have both. I've heard that comment from two people now.
I like the idea of, there's obviously a lot of development on the table for apartments. That's why there's a moratorium, I believe. And maybe one of the things that could happen during this moratorium is looking into exactly what was discussed by Keith, is improving the standards of what we're building so that it could potentially become condos in the future.
Okay, so I'm hearing an amendment or an addition to that one, also look internally to see if, you know, probe with builders maybe and say, hey, are we part of the issue? If we take care of issue A, are we right behind with another issue? And that's something we should acknowledge in our work. I'm seeing a lot of head nodding on that. Okay, great. Let's see, what's the next one? Accommodate single room occupancy or mini suites in multifamily zones. So there, what we're talking about is a phenomenon that started in Seattle about 10 years ago, where builders came up with this concept of within, well, it actually goes back a long, long, long time, but this is when it started getting some traction and some new traction in new development. Most of the time in the past, old hotels might be converted to residence, and it became a very affordable form of housing. In Bellevue in 1995, if any of you are familiar with downtown Bellevue, there's a building called Pacific Inn, and it looks blue and yellow and kind of aqua green. And if you look closely enough, it's all maritime themed architecture. If you look closely enough, that's what they were kind of doing. That builder was from California, and the city actually provided him some funding assistance. It's generally a market rate project, but it's all, at the time, they were considered very small units. They were like 300 square feet and smaller. And this builder got this notion from doing development around the West Coast that places like Seattle have old hotels that can be converted and have been over the years and form a very affordable form of housing for retail workers and people like that who work in the centers. But in suburbs, you don't have that stock. And so he figured out a way to build it from scratch, okay? Build it new, because there's no old hotels to convert in downtown Bellevue. And so he builds them, and the Pacific Inn, Marvin Gardens, he names them all after the Monopoly pieces and the light blue and the first two sections of the track, okay? And he was doing that like 25 years ago. Then in Seattle, the next evolution was builders figured out a way around the land use rules in Capitol Hill, and they could build these small buildings that were big, comparatively speaking, to all the other homes in the neighborhood. And those homes would be sliced and diced up to be, even though they were licensed as only 3 units, they'd slice and dice each of those 6-bedroom units up and have 18 people living independently in them. And that got a little controversial because it felt like kind of a mismatch. So you'll notice here we've made the statement in multifamily zones. So we're not talking about the Seattle experience. We're talking more like what the first example I gave you, is a builder coming in and just building really small units. There's a builder now who's been building in Redmond and Kirkland, and he builds, his units are like 200 square feet and maybe a little smaller sometimes, and a little bigger, so 150 to 300 square feet. And borrowing a little bit from some of the approaches. They do have like a shared kitchen, but all the units do also have microwaves and stuff, so the kitchens aren't used very often. They're more just sort of common areas that people share. And he's been building those as a market rate builder. And so that's kind of what we're describing is units that you historically would not have seen, but he finishes one and he starts another one. So what is that telling you?
They're saleable.
Well, these are rental, but right. There's a demand. There's a demand. And you know why there's a demand? Does anyone know why there's a demand? He's getting more rent per square foot than any market rate builder.
Because people need a place to
But
live.
the absolute rent is the lowest absolute rent in town. And so people are sacrificing space for a price point. And he has found a way to get to a price point of under $1,000 in residential unit. He's rented them for like $800. Still not inexpensive, but compared to everything else out there, and downtown Redmond, you have things, what's DigiPen? And you have other campuses, and downtown Kirkland, you know, so he has found a niche in the market. But he's also needed a little help from the cities to get there. He tries to get a little less parking in his buildings, but he's also demonstrated that the parking demand is very low. I mean, he's done lots of studies with cities and stuff like that. So the question is, should the city look at if they, you know, if the market wants to build that, is there any, it's sort of like the same comment Keith made about condos. Is there anything about our regulations that if a builder came in and wanted to build that kind of housing, that the regulations would get in the way of it? Is there a potential need for something like that here, that we should be sure that if the market wants to build it, they could?
My thought on that, the first thing that popped to my mind was apartments. Is that kind of the
Yes.
same? Okay.
Yes.
So I think this could be a good small part of this bigger puzzle, but I'd be concerned about kind of opening the floodgates on these and letting them just be scattered everywhere. I think this could really work in a very select zone. I'm mostly thinking about, like, I think transit-oriented development is kind of a separate thing maybe, but it seems to kind of fit into that type of zone where this could work right next to a transit station where people that use transit might want to live in this setting, or maybe right next to a big retail zone or something like that, and where it becomes walkable to places that people work. So that's my thought.
Okay. Other reactions?
So one thing I think we need to look at, Arthur, is, so if you're creating 150 square foot to 200 square foot units, the thing we'd have to look at is, does our zoning allow that level of density? Even if it's a small building, the number of units per acre could be huge, right?
Yeah.
So I think we need to look and see if there's a barrier there.
Right.
And if so, to John's point, you know, how would you potentially undo that in a limited way? If that's the concern, right?
Right. So that's right. So that's an example. If you have an area that uses a density per acre overlay, you're not going to see this. Right. It's only in areas where you use a floor area ratio where you're allowed to build to the box, kind of thing. So that's pretty much, unless it was a small site and you just couldn't make other stuff work. He built one right next to our office in downtown Redmond. It was 2 single-family lots, just sort of like, and it's now 120 units. But it's fine. It seems to be working just fine. Anyway, other comments on this idea? So I've heard don't open the floodgates is one comment I've heard. Other perspectives on it? Anyone have a counter perspective or concur with that or some other thought? Because again, remember, this is as much, keep this in mind with an idea as well as you like an idea or not.
So 2 comments about that. One, in addition to it, would be the thought of co-op housing. I haven't heard that discussed yet, which would work with 100 or 200 square foot units because you would have shared spaces like kitchen and bathroom facilities. But also,
Can you describe co-op housing a little bit more in case others don't?
Yeah, so co-op housing would be an ownership stake in a large flat, I guess you could call it a large flat, where you might be 20 units per floor, and someone would actually own, be incorporated, and your shareholders, which would be your tenants, would own a piece of the corporation. And then you live either, you could have shared facilities like bathrooms and kitchens, and in some cases, co-op would also supply maybe a kitchenette or something like that in each unit. Second question is, if we do go with a 100 or 200 square foot unit, then that means our capacity for higher density would then increase based on our limitations in terms of the amount of land that we would be able to use. So you'd have more people per square foot. Part of our policy or part of our plan, do we want to actually limit and put restrictions on what minimum requirement would be free space per person? So if we're going to have these really high density units, then maybe on the surrounding sides of the building, we would want more space, right? Because if all of a sudden we have all these extra people living in Issaquah, does the city have the resources to be able to handle all these extra people? Not just where we're going to put them, because we figured that out. If we can do 100 square foot or 200 square foot units, we have a lot more density. Do we want that much density?
Okay. That feels like the infrastructure question raising its head again some.
And if you have that much density in a small area, will you be able to preserve more of the trees and surrounding environment that's disappearing so rapidly? The other question I had was, what would be the difference between single-room occupancy and boarding houses?
Probably not a whole lot. I mean, a boarding house, you usually, if you think of the old term of it, you've got your food too when you live there. And an SRO, you typically don't. Single-room occupancy.
The difference would be the shared kitchen and dining facility.
I'm not sure from a code point of view. I'm just saying from a impression of when you think of a boarding house, you often think of people also getting their meals. And in an SRO, people don't get meals. Now, from a building official's point of view, I'm not sure to what extent they see differences. Maybe there's a little more fire, the units are more independent in an SRO, so there might be building code issues. We'd have to do a lot more exploring to see the difference between a boarding house per se and an SRO. I mean,
I was particularly thinking for aging populations. Many people do not want to have the burden of doing all their own cooking. And so single room occupancy with services might be very appealing.
So, okay, now I type from time to time, read between lines or try to put things together that I'm hearing. So I heard co-op, we came out and we started with apartments or SRO. And now I'm hearing co-op, I'm hearing boarding home, I'm hearing a few more ideas on small spaces, little more communal type living, but in different shapes and forms. Is that any kind of a theme here, or that should be expanded on? Because the next one is more about in neighborhoods. These that you're describing feel more multifamily in nature. Number 8 is going to be sort of the same question of diversity related to cottages and duplex, multiplex. But this first one is sort of about diversity, small forms of housing that are maybe a little higher density and more rental in nature. I'm kind of just winging it here. So reactions.
So problem statement number 3 shows that 30% of the Issaquah residents live alone, yet under 10% of the units are 1 bedroom or less. I think that would probably be part of answering this type of question, because those will either be individuals or maybe couples. What are they currently choosing as their housing? And would that type of individual choose something like that? Or is there not a demand in Issaquah for that?
So a question you asked, is there demand? Well, I'm going to let you, you had your hand up, so I don't want to get off track and not let you make your comment too before.
Oh, actually, I was going to talk about something that Therese said
Okay.
About the ownership piece. What my concern with having the smaller units, and if we have them in condo form, is that they'll just get sold and they'll turn into rentals.
Okay.
So there's just some people will just show up and buy a whole bunch and then turn them into rentals. So that if we do that and want to restrict to owners, then we have to have some kind of owner-occupied rules along with it, or else it'll just be, it's the same problem. So.
All right, so that's a concern area for us to note. Okay, yes.
So I own a condo right now, and one of the restrictions is you have to be there for 2 years as an owner. You cannot rent the units. So, there could be restrictions such as those placed, that you have to be there.
And that's through the loans, right?
I'm sorry?
Is that through your loan? Or the
HOA.
association rules?
Yeah, that's the rule of the association.
Of the association, okay. All right, so that's a thing to note. And so now back to the response of, here's how many households, and this is how many units we have, which is something we pointed out in an earlier meeting. Again, number 7, these have all, other than the co-op, so the co-op is different, that is ownership form. The other ones, SRO, boarding house, those are rental. So they're both sides of this story of small units. Are they both part of this continuum we talked about 30 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago? Is this part of it, or is it just doesn't feel like a fit in this town? You know, to some extent, we don't do any of the building. The city doesn't build, they just enable. Okay, and so I think the question to you is, should our rules enable it if the market wants to do it? And if we do want the market to be able to do it, what kind of things do we want as a community so that it feels okay that we've allowed it to happen? So your point about, gee, we'd like, if it's an ownership form of housing, for it to be ownership if we can, okay? If that's the intent of that one. But we've got some examples that their intent would be rental, and the boarding house might be for seniors who don't want to have to do all, it's sort of a lightweight group home, right? But group homes, you got to have medical and stuff. Maybe somebody wants that, but they don't need the medical. They just want the meals, right? Is sort of what you're saying. If you think about it, if you go to senior facility, I mean, it's interesting you say it that way, because if you go to senior properties now, the big commercial ones, what do? Live on your own. You can take the meals, or you can go for full-blown health and meals. And they give you the ability to go back and forth between that. So one question would be, well, should those same kind of choices potentially be there for seniors, but not in large commercial developments? And that's, if I think, the boarding house versus the adult family homes versus just living in your home the way you are would be sort of a comparable to what's going on in the commercial industry to help seniors stay in their community.
And a boarding house wouldn't have to be restricted to seniors. You could
No, but, right, exactly.
people who are starting out and people who are retiring all in the same place.
So I see a light next to yours.
Yeah. So we have a local nonprofit that supports people with disabilities that has 3 adult family homes where a caregiver lives with 5 individuals.
Yes.
And it's very flexible. It works great. It's in neighborhoods. So I think that that's really important that we keep that in mind too.
That's it, right. Okay.
Because we have quite the population here.
Okay. So I'm sorry.
I also noticed that this conversation seems to be absent from our debate right now is, what about senior living? What is the city's current plans for senior housing? And I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to, you're always a step ahead of us. You're just ready to go, because that's number 9.
Right ahead.
So I'm not quite ready for that one. We don't want to skip over number 8.
I just make
a couple more comments now.
Yeah, I just make maybe a general comment. I mean, I think everything we're saying is right. It's just, I think everything has to be on the table. I would say the city should, work hard to lower burdens on developers wherever possible, and then let the market drive it to some degree. Because everybody says, oh yeah, we want people to, be able to live in Issaquah that also work here, and we want all kinds of people to be here and all that stuff. And then we at the same time say, oh, but we don't want apartments. And so I think we just sort of have to put our money where our mouth is. And it can be done in a smart way. I think that decision probably should be made at the project level. It should be part of the strategy, I think, and then we can make those decisions at the project level. That's what I would.
And so what I'm going to, maybe sort of to your point that I'm trying to put out, we've been asking for all evening, but just to sort of give you another way of another example of it, is we've helped a lot of cities write rules to allow accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law apartments. But they're not just outright allowed. There are some conditions, like owner occupancy, or if you do it in addition to your house, it has to match. The door can't be right next to the front door. The door needs to be on the side or hidden landscape. There needs to be one more parking space, not a new parking space, but at least enough parking for one extra car. The things to make it so that if it does happen, it feels like a good fit. So on all of these, you're giving us comments that sort of help us. What are the things that, if we're going to open it up, because right now you have a moratorium going on because maybe it didn't feel like it was quite the right fit. And so that's what this conversation is important for, is what are some of the things for us to think about that might make it a better fit, okay? So, no, take that one out, that's just not a fit in this town. You're going to get a matrix at the end of the meeting where we took out manufactured housing communities because one town I work for does have them, but you don't. So we just took it off the list. I'm not hearing anything so far that says these ideas are missing the mark, which is good because all of us as staff looked at them and we tried to come up with ideas that we thought could be good fits. But we're going to give you a chance at the next meeting to also add other ideas too. Okay, so this is not the list. You've already given us a few ideas tonight. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about number 8, which is the diverse forms, and this is more like in single family areas. So this is cottages or even duplexes, or a multiplex usually means like a triplex. So what's your thoughts about that idea? Ooh, that was fast.
So what I've heard, and I saw the housing levy and went, fixed income. That is a big concern for seniors, staying in their homes. If we continue to increase the costs on them, particularly when they have fixed income, they're going to have to leave.
And so how are you correlating that to this item?
So so it's options and services. I mean, so I saw it more as enabling seniors to stay in their homes, maybe having some exemptions for certain people. I don't know whether that's possible. That's just my thought. Oh, I thought we jumped to 9 already.
No, I was on 8.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was
Oh,
thinking
that's number 9. I thought that might have been an 8. Okay. Hold that thought.
I was,
Got other comments about 8? Because 8 is one that has two sides of a coin potentially, for sure.
So Chris has already mentioned the adult family homes in single-family areas.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to be causing any problems. We're already doing it on a limited basis.
Okay. Now, those are houses that are physically the same as the rest of the other homes in neighborhoods, but that's a good point. You have adult family homes in your neighborhoods now, kind of thing. If you feel, I don't know, if some people in some communities, that's been of some question. So I thought I saw something over here.
I think I'm missing number 8. Isn't this already allowed? This is, like you're saying, allow people to build all sorts of houses, right? I'm missing the point, sorry.
So this is to say, looking at, like in a typical single-family area, would you allow, and usually if you allow cottages, you're allowing more cottages than could have been built otherwise. So if somebody had enough land for 3 single-family homes, they might build 5 cottages.
So this is one that, so this is one, you're right, this is allowed now. And I think that's the question really more for the city right now is, do we allow that to be something that can happen? So for example, what's happening in Bellevue right now is in a lot of neighborhoods, a single family house is being torn down and in its place is basically 3 or 4 larger houses because it used to be a very different housing to land ratio, right? And so for us, the issue is coming up in Old Town. And the issue on a scale perspective is about tearing down one 1950s Rambler and putting back a duplex or maybe subdividing in 2 duplexes. And so as an issue and for a group that's talking about housing and housing issues, is that something, do we see enough benefit for the added capacity, but at some point, do we lose potentially the character that makes this city a little bit different than maybe some others? That's the dilemma with, I think, 8 more than anything. And so you're right, that what's allowed now is it can happen. And if that's fine, if everybody says, you know what, we need the additional housing stock, then we just leave that one on the table. If there's some issues there, maybe we need to unpack it a little bit.
I think one of the positive examples is just a few blocks from here, Compassion House, which is a duplex, which looks no different than the other houses around it.
Other comments on this topic?
So I think one of the things that would be a concern, and I'm putting aside, I'm assuming just market housing, not anything for adult homes. But I think considering that then is, I do think there's a character point to be made. So there's certainly, I think we all probably enjoy Front Street, not the traffic, but being there and walking around. The traffic would get worse and it wouldn't feel like Front Street anymore, or that area would feel different. And so I don't know that it's a no, not anywhere ever, but I think there's probably certain areas of the town that we would all say like, hey, probably not here, where that balance is a little different. My other question, I guess, would be, are we assuming this is, I think the other concern, and maybe this is longer term, because you know, the Highlands being a relatively new development, but that was already built to a certain density. So, you know, there's no extra parking spaces. That was already all thought of. So, you know, 10 years down the line, if we start, you know, where there are single-family homes putting triplexes there, that area is going to be a disaster. And I live there, so I'll just caveat that with, you know, sort of thinking about the longer-term effects of that in areas that were maybe built with a certain amount of density already built in. So those would be a couple of considerations that I would say not no, but think deeply about where and when.
Is there current code or zoning restrictions as to where it's allowed currently, or is it just overall, if it's a residential, you can do this?
So the zoning code will state whether like a duplex is allowed. Right now, the city doesn't have a cottage ordinance. Other cities do. And so part of what we're talking about now is should we enable a cottage ordinance with the idea, again, that creating other types of housing stock might, maybe at a smaller scale, could be more affordable than what's available otherwise. And so I'm going to say this, Trish, without knowing what I'm talking about, so if I'm wrong, just speak up. I believe that most single-family zones allow duplexes. Most, but not all. So,
But zones can be anywhere in the city.
right.
So in other words, you have a certain kind of zone and where you think it's appropriate. So I'm going to put my foot in my mouth and maybe get in trouble given the comments here, which is, the question would be potentially, in looking at these, you need to be more refined geographically than just your traditional single family, for however you do your classifications. And what I'm almost hearing here is it maybe needs to be more refined geographically somehow. And I'm not sure, some cities just aren't geared to do that. Others are geared to do that, where they could say in this neighborhood it's okay, and in that neighborhood it's, you could have SF1 in 2 different neighborhoods, and in one you allow the cottages and the others you don't. Some cities will do that. I don't know if that's something that, for this idea to go forward, that's the qualification that it should have, and if so, that might be the killer for this city or not. I'm not sure. Maybe that's what I'm sort of hearing from the comments, is it's not a carte blanche idea.
I wouldn't want to change zoning in South Issaquah, because now you're going to be putting a lot more traffic through main Issaquah to get to arterials like 90. But it would be appropriate for areas like the urban core or communities around 90, or have easy access to 90.
It's more than the traffic, the infrastructure, because it's water, sewer, all the other infrastructure that is going to get strained if you put too much density.
So I've heard infrastructure, including traffic. I've heard character is another consideration. Did I hear that? I thought I heard that.
I think,
Right, thank you. I thought I wrote that down.
obviously, yeah, each and every one of these only applies to certain areas. I think we've kind of established that. I think when I think about cottage housing, I think it could be really successful in an area like Old Town, where we spend a lot of time talking about preserving character. And I think the critical part of this whole cottage discussion would be, like, I guess I picture like a community being kind of created, it has to be at a certain size, a certain number of units, call it 4 or 5. But that requires more than just a single family plot of land to do with the character that we're talking about. So I don't know how many places cottages could really successfully work, but I think it's something that the city could potentially look at, saying, okay, developers, we're going to create opportunities for these collection of properties to be combined if they are turned into a certain number of cottage units.
So you just described something that might be something like what Redmond did in one neighborhood. Redmond has a neighborhood that's an older neighborhood, but more spread out. So there's a lot of infill going on. And they create an ordinance that says, and sometimes people will put 2 plots together, and that's enough to do 10 homes or 15 homes, and this is the Rose Hill area. And they made a rule that says, when you do that, X% of the units must be under a certain size. Because they didn't want all the homes to be this. They wanted, so it's like 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 have to be under 1,500 or 2,000 square feet. So they actually put that in their code that says we want units of different sizes if your development's over a certain size. And I've never seen any other city do that. But it was totally a response to a neighborhood concern of, we're we got such a diverse form of housing now, and we want the new stuff to have at least some diversity in it. So that was something they did in one neighborhood.
So we just had the survey on Old Town, and part of that was talking about housing and the character of housing, and there was a very strong disagreement, if I remember correctly, with the idea of consolidating lots. and ending up in that area with multifamily units and things like that. I feel like cottages could be an exception to that, that would fit that feeling. It wasn't presented on the housing survey, because I guess we hadn't thought of it at that point. But it could be a way that the neighborhood would be comfortable with consolidation of lots if you're keeping that character.
Okay. I want to make sure we save some time for senior, because that one got some quick attention. Because we're not going to, I want to make sure we cover all these tonight, and then we want to give you your homework assignment. Oh, I thought you, oh, so it's 8? I thought it was 8:30. Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought when this afternoon you said 8:30, so I've been watching my watch this whole time. So we're at 8, and I thought we had till 8:30, so sorry. But senior, just if anyone else has some comments about, quick comments about senior housing, and then we want to give you a homework assignment. But you've been sort of doing part of the homework assignment, but we want to give you a more explicit one that's related to that. So kind of thing. But any other quick comments about senior, and we'll continue that at the next meeting. We can do that, but are there any quick comments on senior housing?
I hear two different things from seniors. Some seniors like living with other seniors, and others want to stay in their home or neighborhood partially because they want to be with people who are not all seniors.
Right.
I would love to see a community in which it's possible for seniors to survive on their fixed income and still live around people that they know.
Okay. All right.
So kind of related to that, but also to get back to what Ron said earlier about supportive services, because that would fit with seniors as well as the low income, is the nearest place for supportive services that would allow people to stay in their homes or to have like mostly independent but get some services is HopeLink, and they're all the way up in Redmond. We could encourage HopeLink to build an office here in Issaquah. That would be amazing, because there's really nothing here in Issaquah that allows that for seniors or low income, either one.
Just one last comment. I actually just want to refer back to Teresa's comment on sort of condos being a step into the housing market and also a step out. Again, I think that just fixed understanding of what you're going to be paying. As I understand, if you're a senior, fixed income, fixed costs is helpful. So to me, it just underscores the importance of making progress on that condo issue.
Okay. Okay.
We presently have a senior strategy.
What do you mean by a senior strategy?
Does the city presently have a plan to address senior housing?
So our current plan is to let the market determine.
Right.
So this is why we're talking about it, right?
Right.
If you want a different plan, we need to talk about it.
Right. I mean, you do have senior assisted housing in your community, but it's been through the market.
Right.
Completely. But you do have some.
And there's a new senior rental project going in with Gateway, so on Newport. So, I mean, senior housing is here and it's being built, but there's no strategy at the moment.
So it's just, which is how most housing is. The market builds the
Yeah.
housing in our community, but cities have done things to encourage more diversity. Bothell has an overlay for seniors housing. And if you ever go to the Bothell North Shore Senior Center, the north, right, and Bothell, right across 522 from downtown, and you look around it and it's all senior housing, that's a single family zone that had senior overlay. And the senior overlay made that the more desirable use, and now you have 5 different developments that are geared towards seniors right around their senior center because of what the city did with their zoning. So you can be more proactive about it or not. So in the interest of time, do we have the full matrix to hand out?
Yes.
Okay. So I think.
And there's a practice slide if you want to explain it.
Oh, great, the practice slide, thank you. So what Trish is going to hand out is this list that you've seen is from a much longer list that we've developed, and you're now going to get to see the whole list, okay? But you've seen a listing of things. We've tried to show you how you started with data, and you identified needs and a mission statement and all that, and we gave you what we thought were strategies that helped best to address those needs that you identified. But we might not got it all right. You've given us some other ideas tonight. So what we think would be probably good is we will attempt to get written up the notes from tonight and add them to the matrix we just had on the wall. We'll fill in the ones that weren't filled in. We'll also go back to the focus groups and add in notes from their comments to see where they match up, if any of them make comments about any of the specific strategies. And then we will have that for you, and then you can start reading through this on your own. And the idea at the next meeting is now you see our collective list of strategies. How does that feel to you? Okay? And how does it feel to you both in terms of the comments and the things that need to be thought more about, and also does this feel like a good fit? Again, the idea being these are the most important ideas. What you see there are the full range. Some of those things the city has already worked on. That might be some of the reasons they're not on the list here. But we want to give you an opportunity at the next meeting to challenge the list a little bit and see if there's one or two things you would like to add to the list from looking at this or any other ideas that pop in your head from reading that list. Okay? And again, this is about all kinds of housing, not just affordability. It's about housing in general in the city of Issaquah. So at the next meeting, it's a combination of how does the collective list look, how do the comments look that we've been developing over the last couple of meetings, and do you want to supplement it in any way? Okay? Or after you've thought about it more, take off or really challenge any of the ones that are on the list. Okay? So that's what we have. Is there more?
No, but the next meeting is May 25th. Remember we sent you.
Trish, be on the mic.
Is May 25th, so it's 2 weeks. We weren't sure if we would need it, but we put it on your calendars anyway. Does that still work for, I guess we'd have to send it to the new folks because they might not have gotten the first invite. But it would be in 2 weeks, and we'll try and get all our homework done and sent to you all a week before the meeting, so you would have it and as soon as we can get it to you. Are there yes? Sure. Yes, we're still on.
So I'll be out of the country.
Okay.
So can we send you notes?
Sure.
So that you can add them in?
Absolutely. Also, if you all have questions between now and then of things that just didn't make sense tonight, feel free to email any of the staff members as well with your questions too. We're happy to help you through any of this and all of this. Other thoughts before we? Does anyone want to make public comments that have sat through this? And do you want to come up, Steve? Sure.
Hi, my name's Steve Pereira, 170 Northeast Dogwood Street, about 9 years now. So first of all, thank you all for being here and contributing your time and effort to make this issue something that works for Issaquah. So a couple thoughts. The first goes to Mr. Fall's comment. Are we going to require certain people to be offered the affordable housing like first responders or teachers? I'm glad that issue is being looked at, so I won't talk about it further. The second issue was talked about public funds for keeping seniors in the existing housing. My concern is not to be mean, but just if you build a house, at least you have the asset that goes with the community. If you have affordable housing that gets used to subsidize, then that public trust or public funds goes to the senior when they sell the house or to the heirs when they sell the house. It doesn't go back into the public fund for continued use in public housing. So I just want to see if there's a way of talking about that issue to recover part of that funds. Third issue was I'm not hearing enough of the talking about when we talk about affordable housing being built, we talk about a 70-10-10-10 split and what the market rates are, and I just want to make sure that we keep that as a focus. Next issue, we've talked about cottage houses. I've also heard about tiny homes as an issue, and I haven't really heard that talked about as much. I want to make sure that gets part of the discussion. The last issue was, we talked about maintaining the stock of affordable housing, and it seems like there's an opportunity with the Providence Heights community for the SRO, or the idea of a place that already has dormitories and living spaces for staff could be used, either transitional housing or permanent housing, before we lose that as a stock within the Issaquah community. I'd like to see that be part of that discussion of, can that be included or enfolded in? I think there's just a real potential for a loss of affordable housing if we lose that existing stock that could be used. Thank you.
Anything else from any of you all?
So a lot of this discussion, I find it very difficult to have without learning about the city's plans around infrastructure development. I know I keep going back to this, but I feel the pain every day with the traffic. What's the best way to figure out what's the city's plan for infrastructure development, let's say, over this next 6 months?
For just transportation or
Not
for
6
water?
months, and not just transportation, but schools, everything. I mean, everything comes with you have to provide the whole, it's not, yeah.
Right, and there's plans actually on the website. We have a 5-year water plan, 5-year sewer plan, those kinds of things. The school districts have their own plans for growth that are every 6 years that get updated every year. And those, we can get you a link to those, but we do the impact fees for schools, so we have to have their annual plan. But we can walk you through, and the transportation
Trish,
plan.
we have an EVC meeting next week. We can talk about that next
Oh,
week.
excellent. They can mentor you right through there. But that's a great question, because there's so many pieces to the puzzle of any city. Great. Any other thoughts, ideas? Economic Vitality Commission meets next week. So sounds like they're gonna get a nice primer on it.
Should we come and listen?
And learn, you can see it on TV, because it's always.
No, it's not in
Oh,
here.
you guys aren't, lucky.
So it's Wednesday at 5:30, City Hall Northwest, Pickering Room.
Okay,
One
good to know.
comment.
Sure.
For Keith, it would be nice if you had a nice model and you plug stuff in and could tell how the infrastructure changes.
So the city just purchased a software called City Engine.
City Engine?
And we have to build the base. But what it would allow you to do is to, as we get these development projects that come in, you could then see what they look like in the neighborhood in a 3D image. And it gives you the ability to change your perspective along the street to see how it will impact before it's even getting permitted. So we're getting there, but we're in the process now of building the base.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Before I close, just for Planning Policy Commission members, if there's any way that you all can meet at 5 o'clock, remember we were going to do today at 5 o'clock to do the Transportation Improvement Program. Our engineer can't be here when he was supposed to be here, so he asked if we could meet on the 25th before this next joint meeting, but at 5, and it sounds like that you won't be here. But if I can get you all to think of your schedules and let me know to see if that could be a viable, and it'd only be an hour, so we'd really have to focus. But I'd rather us get to look at it than not get to look at it. So I'll be emailing you tomorrow morning for RSVPs, okay, just to have that in your head as you drive home. But thanks, you all did really well tonight, considering how many new members and the barrage of data that we gave you. Thank you very much.
Trish, I just want to thank Arthur for taking the barrage of questions we
Absolutely.
had.
Absolutely. It's good to have an expert in the house. Thank you all. We're off camera.